But I'm going to do them as a mine today. It's something different. I've never done it.
So our next presentation is on subrogation. And these fine three gentlemen here, we have Hobie Hind. He is from Butler and Pappas. Pappas. We have Trey Johnson, who is the SORM property policy assigned adjuster, that if anyone who's in the property program has a claim, hopefully you will not see Trey, because we don't want you to have any claims.
Right.
But if you do, he's the gentleman that will get in contact with you and bring his pretty face out to help you through the process. And we also have Kenneth Eagen. Ken Eagen is one of the primary level adjusters on our program. We've got 4 current carriers that are paying out the majority of the losses, and this is the gentleman behind the scenes who helps Trey in adjusting those claims. This presentation will be combined. Hobie will be presenting, and these 2 gentlemen will be putting their fantastic input into the presentation. So at this point...
She's building this way up. We cannot promise any of what she just said.
So I shall hand it off to the gentlemen. Please welcome.
Thank you very much. Ken, you want to kind of introduce us and the general process of subrogation? Okay.
Okay, well, just first and foremost, thank you very much for having us here. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule. As Michelle said, I'm one of the carriers on the insurance property program currently. What we do is we work. We currently have a relationship with Butler, Pappas, and there's Hobie Hind from a subrogation standpoint. Also, it's also good to work with Trey Johnson, who's like Michelle said, he's your adjuster on the company. So between us 3, what we do is try to make everything goes smooth. Try to get when there's a loss, when there is a loss that happens. First and foremost, we want to get out there, help you out as much as possible. If there is any type of subrogation, that's what we're here to talk about today, or potential. The best thing is to get on it very quickly. So.
And that'll be a resonating theme of our presentation is time and how fast a lot of these things have to happen. Yeah. And Trey, you want to add from the independent adjuster's perspective, what is your view on subrogation and how do you approach it when a claim happens? Just generally.
Yeah, it's time sensitive. It's part of triaging a claim, if you will. When I call up and I'm making first contact, I'll ask what's happened, how bad is it, have you got help started, those kinds of questions. If it's something that sounds like we have some subrogation immediately, I would warn you guys to keep the evidence, set it aside. Don't change the scene at all. We need to think about who we can place on notice about it. Those are kind of things that segue from the initial questions that I'd asked you before I came out. And if I don't get those questions answered properly and I come out on the scene, or maybe things are developing and we figure out there's subrogation, then at that point I'll say, okay, let's stop and let's think about taking care of the evidence and calling in Hobie or some of the others to help out with it.
Now, the first video clip, which we would have played, is a funny scene from Stripes, when Bill Murray has spent all night with his crew getting ready for the next day's drill parade, and it's real funny. That's it's very funny. It's humorous. But
if you don't know it, you fail.
Exactly. And the point that the clip would have provided is that teamwork and coordination is absolutely, without question, the most important aspect of a subrogation investigation. And how many people here are actually involved at all in the subrogation process for whatever entity you're related to? Anybody? Okay. And it's, what it is, in a nutshell, the Subro 101 definition is the insurance carriers step into the shoes of their insured. So whatever entity you are representing, whatever entity you are, when the carriers make a payment, I always do this little dorky thing at trial, you literally step into the shoes of the insured. In this case, that would be you guys. And oftentimes, when we're involved, we are representing not only the insurance carriers, but we're also representing you guys for your deductible. So I know through the SORM process, I think it's a $100,000 deductible is the standard deductible.
For our large agencies and $10,000 for our smaller agencies.
Okay. And we work, on behalf of a lot of, most of the major insurance carriers in the country. Munich Re, AIG, Hartford Steam Boiler, Hartford themselves. And we do this on a very large scale for lots of insurance carriers. And the SORM program has 4 insurance carriers. We work with all 4 of those carriers on a routine basis. And what happens is the entity will have a loss If it exceeds the deductible, the insurance carriers will pay the money. And you guys have a $100,000 deductible, let's say. Now, earlier we heard a little bit about the co-insurance penalty that some entities might suffer if a building isn't insured at value. Well, we also try to recover or subrogate for any of your uninsured losses. So that penalty, the co-insurance penalty, hypothetically, would be something that would get incorporated into the claim. And what we do, as was just briefly alluded to, is when a loss happens, our entire existence, all I do, it's literally the only professional job I've ever had in my life, is trying to find, is there a target of recovery, whether it's a contractor, whether it's it could be just a person, it could be a resident in a dorm hall, it could be a fire sprinkler company, it could be a general contractor, a subcontractor, it could be a manufacturer of parts or something. We try to target an entity to recover the money from them so that everybody hopefully can be made whole. Now, it makes a big difference, certainly to the insurance carriers. And Swiss Re, Ken's company, has a very aggressive subrogation model that tends to work very effectively. So whatever model, I know a lot of you guys are not members of the SORM program, perhaps over time that will change. But maybe one takeaway that you guys can have from today is that aggressive approach to recovery, subrogation, is going to lead to much better results in bringing back all the money that you lose as a result of whatever the casualty event was that has happened, whether it's a water loss or a fire loss or something in between.
I guess, I would probably go into, the fact that it's very important for us to work with obviously the insurer as well, because we can't subrogate without you, because we don't, Hobie can explain to it better than I can, but we don't have a contract without third party exchange. Right. That's why we look for, a lot of communication back and forth in the relationship.
And the cooperation and the teamwork is important because the first 2 weeks after an event happens, that really makes or breaks the entire claim. Whether it's it could be a 2-month process where you get it settled very quickly. It could be a 5-year process where I end up in litigation for 3.5, 4 years, fighting with Simplex Grinnell or some entity that just doesn't ever want to pay a claim. So whatever the issue is. And this plays out over time. Something that was done either right or wrong, correctly or incorrectly, in those first 2 weeks, usually ends up being the difference maker later on. And so we have to work. I train all my folks, all my associates that I've had over the years, many of them are now my partners, that no matter what else is on your plate, unless you're about to miss some crucial deadline, when a new loss happens, everything else gets pushed off to the side. You focus on just that. And so what you guys take away from today, something to do within your operation, make sure that there's some program, some concept in place, wherever you are, that can make that event and all the stuff we're going to talk about today really that important, so that everything from the evidentiary standpoint, the notice process of adverse parties, all of that is done perfectly, because you only get one shot at it. And if you mess it up in the first couple weeks, sometimes you don't even have that long, sometimes it's just a couple days. If you mess that up, it has dire effects later on in the claim process and the recovery process. And another point to make, whenever I handle a claim for a very large corporation, and it's especially true for governmental entities, we represent a lot of governmental entities in this process. You guys have a risk program. You guys have a risk plan that is supposed to be followed. You have departments that specialize in risk. And so everything we talk about today from the property recovery side, the subrogation side, is equally true if you guys were on the liability side of a claim, where someone's targeting you. Now, I know there are certain things in all states where you get immunity for and some things you don't get immunity for. But let's, for the sake of argument today, though, let's pretend like these are claims that have legitimacy and you guys might be on the hook for something you don't have immunity for. All of these evidence issues, all these timing issues, and all these party identification issues we talk about with property subrog are just as crucial to you guys on the liability side, because courts invariably will hold a government entity or any entity that has a risk plan or risk department to a much higher standard in the evidence preservation perspective. So it's very important on both sides of the fence on these claims that you guys or your agencies or your departments have a good understanding of how these issues play out. Now, this is, all this is just how the process starts. I'm not going to read this to you, but this is the language from one of the 4 policies that SORM has, and this is just the language that's in the policy that basically says when there's a loss, the insurance carriers are subrogated to the rights. It's sort of an assignment. Subrogation acts as a matter of law, so this it's not crucial to the process, but just if you ever wondered where does the right of the insurance company come from, it comes from the policy, but it also comes from equity. It comes from basic legal principles. In fairness, really. And the rule is if a party causes a loss, they should be held responsible for that loss. Now, I cannot tell you how many times, despite my best efforts to explain what to me is a very simple process, insurance company has a contract with their insured, they make a payment. They only made that payment because somebody else caused it. I try to explain this to a jury. Many times they don't comprehend that an insurance company can make a payment and then try to get the money back. Similarly, juries might have a similar reaction to a government entity doing the same thing. So there is a hurdle, there's a burden that we always must overcome to a jury that we're not only is this a good thing for society because we hold people accountable for what they do. Hopefully, we change their actions in the future. I know a lot of sprinkler contractors have changed how they handle their inspections. They changed how they handle their manufacturing processes. The metal halide light industry has changed their lights because of very large subrogation claims that have identified defects in materials and what they were doing. So there's a good societal benefit to this process, but it's always hard to convey that to the jury. So this is where it starts. It starts in the policy. It's a basic equitable principle that is good for everybody, especially deductible recovery, whether it's a homeowner or a corporation or a government entity. That money goes back into the budget for you guys. And the more of that you can do, the better your budget can be used for more utilitarian things that have a greater purpose than fixing what somebody else broke or damaged. You guys have anything you want to add to that? Okay. Now, anybody seen the Blues Brothers? Yeah. Okay. This would have been the famous car chase when the police were chasing Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi through the mall, destroying an entire mall. And obviously the point is, that would have been a fantastic subrogation case against somebody for doing that. And it's just a funny scene, the music is funny, and it's the Blues Brothers. How can you go wrong? Doesn't quite have the same effect that I'm telling you what it is. So that's just one example, though, of the types of claims that anybody can encounter. And you guys are no different than any other corporation, any other claimant that we would see a claim for. And in the old days, I've been doing this now for almost 18 years. Back when I started, pretty much the only thing companies were really, truly focused on was fire loss. That was what always got everybody's attention. And water losses never really seemed to get the immediate reaction that a fire loss would within the insurance company. But over time, I think everybody, including the attorneys who handle subrogation claims and guys and folks like you guys, realize that there's a lot of value in water claims. So we have a lot of, probably over half of my claims that I end up handling now involve water losses. And so that's something that I know you guys encounter. Your pipes fail. We all just went through. It's been brutal. The freeze losses that we've all had. I don't know, have any of the agencies had freeze losses related to recent cold weather down here? Yes. Okay. We saw, my office probably took in 400 to 500 claims all over the southeast from those freeze events that happened. Many of those had good subrogation potential, like a building wasn't heated properly, the pipes were installed improperly. You had dry sprinkler systems failing because water was allowed to build up in the system and wasn't drained out properly. So I think the industry, and certainly folks who have risk departments and have these sorts of things on their radar, have realized that these are very good claims to identify for subrogation, but like every claim, they have to be investigated quickly and efficiently. We have other types of losses. I put down the generic contractor-induced losses. A lot of you guys might undergo construction somewhere, and as part of that, unfortunately, more times than not, there are problems with new construction. There's many problems with renovations, probably especially renovations where a contractor is trying to sometimes fit a square peg in a round hole, adding onto something that's old, or there's not a continuity of materials from one part to another. And sprinkler systems might be connected, and you have problems, just general problems when contractors are involved with those types of things. So, and many times those are very good subrogation claims. I would say this, how many folks here are involved in the contracting process, where you actually deal on the contract side of things? And I don't know if you may already do this, you may look for this, you may not. Oftentimes in construction contracts and contracts in general, there are terms and conditions that will limit your ability to recover from somebody. I would always throw out a cautionary note in every presentation I give to companies that when you are negotiating a contract, look for things like that might affect your ability to recover from somebody. I wouldn't say that you should ever let it hold up a deal, although some companies do. But if you do have a large deductible, let's say, and you see a clause in a contract with a contractor that would prevent you from recovering that deductible, you might want to line that out of the contract if the other side is willing to do it. That will preserve your right of recovery. It'll also preserve the right of recovery of the insurance carrier. And a lot of times it can be done. A lot of contractors, first of all, it's boilerplate. They don't even know it's in the contract. They've got the same form they've been using, and it's hit the cut and paste button, the print button, and they don't even know the language is in there. You ask them to take it out, oh sure, no problem, they take it out. So it's something good to be looking for.
Any specific wording they should be looking for, like hold harmless? Or?
Well, yeah, hold harmless, indemnity language. A lot of times there'll be a section in a contract that's called limitations of liability. If you see something like that, you know that it's going to affect your claim. So those are always good starting points. It comes up in different ways in lots of different formats. Waivers of subrogation, that's another header. A lot of times we'll see waivers of subrogation.
Now maybe this is a question for Michelle, but how do we, because so many of our state agencies are in buildings owned by TFC, so where at what point is there in conflict of interest if our carrier is SORM, who's TFC's carrier? And what happens, we had a recent incident in our building, in fact, where elevator banks went down, seems harmless, and yet we lost about 3 days worth of work. We're just one agency resident in our building, even though we're the largest. So I'm not sure where that went in terms of, lost, recouping loss or anything, but, we had to end up paying employees for not coming to work because we have, you can't just expect everybody to walk up 13 flights of stairs. So what happened?
It is good exercise.
Exactly, 26 flights of stairs. Yeah, and a lot of people did that.
And going down is easier, so it doesn't really count.
Exactly. We had some who did it, but not everybody can. So where is that? What happens with the carrier issue?
Okay, so the question was, if you're in TFC building, if you are a tenant, who's going to help you manage that claim? It is really important for you to speak with your building manager because TFC does not insure all of its buildings. Only buildings that have bonds on them. Correct. Only bonded buildings have insurance because they legally have to have insurance to meet the requirements of the bond, and that's through the Texas Public Finance Authority. They have the insurance, they bill TFC for their specific buildings, and they pay for them. So the building that you are in may not have insurance on it at all. And I think that's important for you to know as a tenant. Yes, sir?
just from personal experience within the last couple of months, being in one of those TFC non-bonded, non-insured buildings, that's why TFC was on the hook to basically send in contractors and everything else after a fairly significant water event.
Is that for building repairs?
Yeah, that affected 4 or 5 floors.
So it is important for you to know that. It's also important for you as a state agency, if you are a tenant, to perhaps consider insuring your contents. Because just because you're in a TFC building and they have an incident like you explained, that doesn't mean that TFC is going to replace your equipment for your state agency. That's your responsibility to ensure that it is insured, or that you have enough money in your budget to move it around to pay for a loss if you were to lose those items due to an incident like the gentleman over there was explaining. Does that answer your question?
I think so.
And this is common. I mean, I do see this in other states as well, where there is, I guess, lack of knowledge of who's insuring what. And that surprised me that those buildings might even be uninsured that they'd be in, because when an event happens, a lot of times there is a whole lot of, well, someone else must be taking care of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that when I hear those words from the subrogation attorney perspective, it's the death knell of the claim, because someone calls a restoration contractor, they come in, they take the plumbing, let's say that plumbing system that froze and broke was 1 year old and was improperly installed. Contractor comes in, first thing they're doing, they're taking all the evidence, they're cutting out the pipes, they're throwing it away. That might have been a 6-figure loss. There goes your subrogation case, in the dumpster the next time the trash is dumped. But if nobody is watching the coordination of the recovery, that sort of stuff happens, and no one's really in charge. No one really knows who's responsible for what, and the case goes away. And for all you guys know, you could have had a very solid recoupment of that money from a contractor.
Actually, I have another question for Michelle to maybe answer her question. As far as salaries for employees, wouldn't that be something that would be covered through the business interruption coverage that they could obtain?
If it was insured, maybe even Chris, if you would like to expand on that.
So it would have to be it's all a chain of events, so it would have to be as a result of a covered peril. So, for example, if fire caused that elevator to be down, there was some damage, then the resulting loss of income from that fire would be covered, but just a maintenance issue, that's not, it's not an insured peril.
Thank you.
Yeah, to that end, it's also direct damage from a covered loss. So what he's alluding to with the fire damage building, then that's why the breakdown of the elevator, just deciding to quit at that point wouldn't be covered, would trigger that coverage for the
No, I'm going to go back to another point about TFC. Do you guys, I have never looked at the policies to see who are named additional insureds or if they're endorsements. Do you guys know?
They're endorsed.
Okay. And that's something else we always look for. One of the rules of subrogation is you cannot subrogate against a co-insured, the anti-subrogation rule. So, like in a normal business relationship, we get involved in lots of landlord-tenant subrogation fights. In y'all's world, where you might be an agency or a sub-agency and another agency is involved, maybe PS is involved, you guys are going to be co-insureds more likely than not. And so you guys, what I would do, and I do this routinely, when I see a landlord-tenant situation where the lease contract bars subrogation, I try to join forces with those other folks. Sometimes it's another insurance carrier. We combine our efforts and pursue a contractor or somebody else who may have caused loss. So once again, it makes it easier to coordinate. You guys are all on one team, and you're not all going off in different directions. Possibly coming up with different theories, possibly doing things to the evidence that affects other people when someone else wasn't there. And so it makes a much more coordinated effort if you guys all try to work together, as opposed to kind of doing everything on your own.
Can I add something to that? One of the benefits that we've had at SORM by insuring our contents, we did have a hailstorm that came and damaged our building. It blew out windows, damaged a lot of our equipment. When we put that claim in, the building was insured through TPFA because it has a bond on it. SORM had its contents insurance. when in this current property program that we have, the deductible for the large agency, TPFA, was 100,000, SORM we had at 10,000. It combines to the larger of the two, and we just paid a small portion of that 100,000 and helped out TPFA paying. So we wouldn't be paying lots of deductibles if there were 7 tenants that were all damaged in one building. It's one cause of loss, one deductible combined, and you share that. So there are benefits as well. Then you don't have that subrogation issue if you've insured your own contents, because you're taking care of what you own. Anything to add?
No, it's a good point. There's, and taking that one step further, if you have a storm event, like she's saying, in hurricanes, spring to mind for me just as a bigger event, there's the possibility that with SORM having this big umbrella, if you will, big policies that cover so many different properties, it's one deductible, potentially one occurrence, and you're only paying for it at one time, as opposed to all these state agencies getting hit for all their individual deductibles, like what you were saying. It gets a little weird with tier 1 if you're right on the coast. Sometimes you've got a percentage deductible, but it still combines things together and makes it a whole lot easier from a lot of angles for me and for you guys.
And there's other types of losses we've listed here. The theme is always the same. You're trying to identify a target, and you have a very limited amount of time to do so. On fire losses, because of the nature of a fire loss, the evidence starts to decay the minute the event happens. A good example for a state agency is one that just happened. Some of you may have seen a warehouse fire in Savannah that had a huge plume of smoke that was affecting air traffic and health issues around Savannah. We got that loss for subrogation. It's through the state of Georgia Port Authority. It's a fire loss of colossal proportions, a 200-and-something thousand square foot warehouse filled with rubber that ends up on the ground. So we get the claim a couple of days after the event happens, and immediately the panic mode sets in because we've got to, first of all, get the port back up and running as fast as possible. But we've got this incredibly complex fire scene. We've got a very limited number of people who witnessed the event from a distance. So they can help us a little bit to identify a general area where the fire may have started. We've got a tremendous number of sprinkler issues. Were they designed properly? Were they sufficient for the hazard? Were they even functioning at the time of the fire, which is actually a question that we're having to deal with. So on a fire loss like that, we've got to literally move mountains to get everybody involved. We have customers inside with their product who have property insurance for their product. Those people have to be involved. So in a claim like that, we end up being very much the clerk of the works, and carriers, the Ken, for instance, and in this particular loss, a friend of Trey's, Patrick Washington, is the adjuster, and he's written into the state of Georgia account. So Pat knows the drill, just like Trey does for SORM, and immediately everyone realizes who the team is and what needs to happen. And so while Pat is handling issues with the insured, with the Port Authority, my team, myself and my team, are finding experts. And we're trying to make sure we get, first of all, make sure we find people who have time to come out to the scene for the vast number of days over the next couple weeks. And they're out there today. They're out there working right now as we speak to be involved in that process. Now, we also know who to involve from the potential targets. And we've dealt with Champion Fire before. We've dealt with ADT, which is Tyco, before. We've dealt with all the metal halide light manufacturers many times, too often to counsel, unfortunately. And so we know who to contact at those companies, and we very politely but very aggressively tell them, listen, I wish we had more time. I wish this wasn't the case, but we've got to have people out there starting yesterday for the foreseeable future doing whatever needs to be done. Can't tell you what that is right now because it's going to be changing every day. The protocol is going to be whatever happens that day will bleed over into something new the next day, into something new the next day. And so we got that handled very quickly. Was it perfect? Probably not, but it was absolutely the best we could do given the parameters and the time frame. So the involvement of experts on all of these issues is crucial to the process. And not just calling up an expert, it's getting the right expert. I know all the insurance folks, Steve probably has a lot of experience with this. Different fire experts have different specialties. So you don't just always just call some fire expert to look at a fire. You have a sprinkler loss. Many people think, well, a mechanical engineer would be the perfect fit. Sometimes, but usually a fire protection engineer is the one expert you need to look at a fire system, protection system of any sort. You're going to have safety experts for slip and fall incidents that might happen on a property. I know universities have those issues routinely, where they have a lot of personal injury claims that are being made against them. And if the process works properly and the team, whether it's through SORM or otherwise, comes together quickly with the right experts, you have a chance to document the evidence, you have a chance to protect your interests, whether you're on the recovery side or possibly the defense side of the claim, in the fastest, best manner. The side benefit of all of this, rapid intervention and rapid, attack of all these issues, is that you save costs in the long run. If you hire people or involve people who know what the different rules of litigation are, statutes of repose, statutes of limitations, different things that you can or cannot recover for, you might not have to hire experts at all. Someone might tell you, the claim has no potential at all in its face. There's no reason you need to spend $7,000 on experts to investigate this because it's going to go nowhere. We know it. And let me hand it off to you guys a little bit on the cost containment issue. From the company perspective, how do you guys view what I just talked about from the cost perspective?
Well, I guess it goes back to everything you're hearing today is rapid. And that's what it is from the subrogation perspective. It's getting in and getting out. And that's one thing that's good about, at least, our team right here, and the team on the SORM account, we can identify these things quickly. We look to Trey to say, Hobie will go to Trey and say, hey, what do you got? And then they'll go to me and say, hey, we're looking at a fire, not a lot of potential from subrogation, do you want to spend the money on it? And we can go back and forth between each other, keep the expenses low, and basically go ahead and do the remediation on your side. And that's key, especially when you have any type of business interruption or time element. That's very key because you want to get, our goal is to get you guys, the insurance up and running as fast as possible. And if we can do that by not closing down the scene from the subrogation standpoint, because we really just don't see it or don't think it's viable, Hobie can look at the contracts quick and say, it doesn't really make sense. It's really, you got a whole bunch of waiver of subrogation kind of like that. Unless you can find a third door into the mix, we can just vote. Now we can go with Trey, get our consultants in there, and get you guys up and running as fast as possible. So it's not only paying a lot, but it's also trying to monitor the expenses on our side and for you, sharing in that subrogation effort, not wasting time, not wasting everybody's effort, not wasting time.
To that end, too, I'd just like to add that the carriers have a vested interest in getting everybody up and running as quickly as possible. If they've got a business interruption exposure, we want to work hand in glove with you guys to make sure that the operation is up and going. You don't have extra expenses you're incurring unnecessarily. Things that we're doing are smart and effective. And Ken, Hobie, myself, all these panels, this is what we do day in, day out. So if we see something that makes sense that we can spend $50 to save 1,000, great. We'll do those sorts of hints and guidance. We'll offer that guidance and try and keep you guys operational and keep things going for you as well. So there's other benefits other than just the straight money. A lot of inconvenience we can help you guys save too.
And that's and that kind of goes into saying we've been doing this and this is what we do. So we've had our bumps and bruises along the way, and we've figured out the best way to make a life on it.
Yeah, it is. I'm going to talk a little bit about the interaction of all this, but it's an imperfect science on its best day, because the cardinal rule of subrogation is don't affect the claim. Now, if I had the luxury of time and I had control of the scene for 2 months, my experts and an unlimited budget, by the way, my experts, myself, we could all do a much better job, but we don't have that, and we have a very limited universe. We have to a lot of times just do the best you can with what you got, so you don't affect the claim. You guys, or the SORM program, has 4 market members. There are 4 insurance carriers, including Lexington, AIG, Swiss Re, and a couple others, Aspen and LIU. So that's relatively speaking, that's a pretty small market of insurance carriers. Many of you might not realize, but most commercial insurance in the country today, I would say it's most, is done through a market share method. What I mean by that is, say you take a huge corporation. In the old days, Liberty Mutual might insure that corporation, or Hartford, or Swiss Re, just by themselves. Over time, I think to spread out the risk a little bit, so that a colossal event somewhere wouldn't so dramatically affect the bottom line. Correct me if I'm wrong. Most of those corporations now, including governmental entities, are insured through a market. So someone may have 7%, someone may have 12%, someone may have 50%, someone may have 1%. It goes below 1 sometimes, and it's crazy. But that's the new normal. That's just what we have to deal with. It makes coordination of a subrogation event a Herculean task. From the IA perspective, you want to talk about that a little bit, Trey?
Yeah, it's herding cats.
Actually, cats sometimes respond. A lot of the insurance carriers don't.
That's right. Sometimes I have to get on my cattle prod and be really persistent, or use cell phone numbers that I've squirreled away and kept, that I don't usually use. But and from my perspective, sometimes it's a little bit of a challenge to get everybody on the same page. They sometimes within companies will have their own set experts, their own set guidelines, their own dollar thresholds, and so on, that don't relate to someone else's company, some other insurance company. So then it's up to me to kind of play the go-between and say, okay, well, Hobie's on it for Mr. Eagen here, and do we really need to hire this other firm, and try and coordinate efforts. So the bottom line is, like Hobie alluded to before, we'd like one set of experts, one subrogation attorney, one representative to tie it all together, just the same as you want the one field adjuster out there to tie everything together. It gets cumbersome with Mr. Eagen and then the other carriers out there hire different field adjusters. We'd all kind of be bumping heads and not coordinated. So that's kind of one of my challenges that I like to tackle and work with Hobie to get some resolution to.
Now, one of the saving graces on the property side is there aren't a lot of people who do what I do. And for the other firms, there's not a lot of firms that do what we do. So we do tend to be very close friends. My best friends in the industry are my biggest competitors in the industry. We hang out at programs and conventions together. We go out to dinner with mutual clients together. We drink together afterwards. So if we do get paired up on a loss with somebody, usually they're very good friends of ours, and we tend to work as a cohesive unit. It doesn't behoove anybody to not work together on these, because if the attorneys can't work together, it pretty much guarantees that the carriers won't be working together, and then everybody will be doing their own thing, and you're going to have huge problems. So, at least from that perspective, it's good that generally most of the carriers work with a very small number of firms who do this, and we all know each other pretty well and can work pretty well together.
And I've been pretty fortunate so far with the SORM program. Everybody plays nice, and I haven't had to bend arms too hard. But every now and then on different programs, it gets to a point where I just roll my eyes and think, really, can we not just deal with the sugar, just get along? But
I guess the more interesting aspect I see is carriers who have a very aggressive subrogation mentality, and there are some carriers out there who I truthfully think don't really know what the word means at this point, and they don't respond and they don't get involved. But at least to their benefit, they tend to defer to the carriers who do have the active subrogation management model. Swiss Re has that. A lot of carriers who have dedicated subrog units follow that approach. The carriers who don't really have a dedicated unit and don't really push subrogation as hard do tend to just let the folks who are involved in it kind of run the show.
Yeah.
And my final point was multitasking taken to ridiculous levels. The loss in Savannah is a perfect example of that. Was anybody here involved in Bastrop, the wildfires? Anybody be affected by the wildfires in Bastrop? That's probably, at least in my 18 years of doing this, the greatest example of an entire industry coming together, whether it's for a lot of personal injury attorneys on behalf of injured people or affected people, the subrogation carriers, the subrogation clients, government agencies, even the adverse parties who have been through many of these sorts of wildfire claims in the past. You guys may not know it, but there's about a $500 million subrogation claim being processed through Bastrop right now as a result of the Bastrop wildfires. And literally every carrier that had a loss is working as one single voice and single unit And we were able to do that within the first 2 weeks of the event, give or take a few carriers who didn't really have their claims all compiled yet. So that's, in my mind, until something bigger and more coordinated comes along, that's my litmus test for how, if you do have a good focus and you have a good team, and you really do have your eye on the ball and the big picture, the entire industry can come together if you really put your minds to it. So I always, whenever an event like this happens, it's just phone call by phone call, note by note, email by email, where you're just coordinating and you have a list of clearly defined things you need, and you just need to bring them together as quick as possible. I rely on Trey, I rely on the independent adjuster to be my primary point of contact with the insured, because that's who you're used to dealing with typically. I talk to my clients like Ken and the others who might be on the market. Sometimes in certain situations I'm talking to other clients of other attorneys, because that attorney has said, you just handle this part of the case, and my clients are your clients are my clients, and we don't let that bother the claim, because if we do that, then the whole thing falls apart. Blazing Saddles, another one of the funniest movies ever made. And I put in this clip. It's the famous, he's Gene Wilder's the Waco kid, and he holds out his hand. And the other fellow says, "Look at that, steady as a rock." Then he goes like, "Yeah, but this is my shooting hand." Shaking Wilder. My point in the clip was, if the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, you're not going to be able to handle this process effectively. And as we alluded to, although we didn't really spend a lot of time talking about it, a well-oiled subrogation program or plan can bring back a lot of money. You do it for the least amount of investment if you have your experts coordinated in the best way, and that gives you the most money back. A poorly orchestrated subrogation event might cost more in expert expenses than the claims even worth. And there may be nothing to recover at the end of the day. So you've got to have your hands working in sync with one another to make this work, and that's what the clip would have given. We've already talked about this through the context of a few of the other slides. I do try to ask for as much leeway as I can get. Certainly on fire losses, where it's more problematic, more time-consuming. So it's like I'm always negotiating with my adjuster or with my client. Say, can you give me 5 days to get everybody out to the scene? How about 8, maybe 10? I talked to Tyco, for instance, on a sprinkler loss. They can have somebody out there next Wednesday. Is that okay? Well, I'd really like to have the scene clean by Monday. Well, you can't do that. Can you give me Tuesday? Okay, Tuesday. I do whatever I can to try to not affect the claim. But depending on the size of the loss, and obviously you always have to balance everything according to the size of the loss and what you might actually expect to get back, you may be able to get a few extra days. And so we always try to make it so that the claim doesn't get larger than it should, but we do whatever we can to investigate and protect the subrogation rights. This clip. Any Monty Python? Are there any Monty Python fans here? Okay. Do you remember the old clip? It's the 100-yard dash for people with no sense of direction. And they shoot the gun and all the runners run in 15 different directions. That's this clip. It's really funny when you get to see it. But earlier we were, I did want to touch on something though. We were talking about LEED certified buildings. We even heard some discussion about solar panels. In subrogation, one of the laws is the law of unintended consequences. I've got a massive warehouse in New Jersey where the entire building, literally every inch of the roof of the building, was solar panels. We have a pretty small fire that starts in the warehouse. Fire department responds. They have to make access through the roof to get to the seat of the fire to put out the fire. They can't, because the solar panels are completely electrified and energized still when they get there. And nobody can figure out how to de-energize the solar panels. So solar panels, fantastic thing. It's going to save tons of money. In this instance, solar panels, horrible thing, causes the entire building to burn to the ground. Suborgation case. We talked about the excess heat that's generated sometimes to make a building LEED certified. You would not believe how many losses happen in server rooms and similar rooms that have sensitive equipment in them because of the buildup of heat that's being caused and created by all this new technology and all these new things that are going in and all this extra technology that has to be incorporated.
Or the fact that people forget there's a water sprinkler system where they're putting their computers.
Absolutely. And, you know, these are run-of-the-mill things that have fantastic subrogation potential. Most of your buildings, I would hope all of your buildings, most of your buildings should be inspected by sprinkler contractors every quarter, maybe twice a year, at least once a year. It varies by jurisdiction. You know, these folks should be looking for some of these issues. They don't look for all of these issues, but they should be looking for a lot of these issues. And you know, that many people might intuitively think, oh, well, it's just, you know, that's just the way it is. But you know, that's not the case. A lot of these claims are very good claims for subrogation. So sometimes the law of unintended consequences kicks in high gear and can cause massive losses. And that's why it's good to have a creative team that specializes in subro, looking at these things. You know, a lot of these things, as the world has evolved, as technology has evolved, and as our knowledge of fire science and some other issues has evolved, you know, there are more opportunities for subrogation because, you know, contractors should be looking for more things than they are, and that's, you know, kind of where my life starts. Okay, so managing the investigation. You know, this is obviously I never stand in front of anybody and tell them this is how you should do this, because every company, every entity, every law firm, every insurance company, every adjusting firm is going to do things differently. But there are some basics that make this process, from y'all's perspective, work the easiest and the smoothest. It has benefits on the recovery side. It has benefits on the claim side. It has benefits on the liability side if you all were a target by somebody who got injured, let's say. You know, you have to have a process. And you need to make sure that, you know, I always call it, you know, let's idiot-proof the process. Let's make it so that this is what's going to be followed from hell or high water whenever an event happens. Make it somebody's responsibility. Make that person or their team responsible for clearly defined goals and parts of the process, and make sure they handle that. Critical in that is having a point person. You know, when I get a new loss, like that Savannah Port loss that just happened. You know, luckily I dealt with the port authority in previous losses up in Georgia, and I knew who the risk manager was at the port. So my first call, you know, I get a call from the insurance company, in this case it was Scottsdale Insurance. I get a call from Scottsdale, hey, we're one of 10 carriers, here's a schedule of insurers, we've had a huge fire, you may have seen it, yes I did love it. My first call was to Danny Thompson, who was the risk manager. And I made sure that he knew we were on it, and you know, he's been through this before with us, and I gave him a list of things that we would need to start the ball rolling. He was all over it. He had his team assembled, he had his people who had the most knowledge of the warehouse, someone else had the most knowledge of the sprinkler system. You know, we had all those people pulled together. He had a process. And he had clearly defined people with roles that played into it. And we could, you know, obviously, you know, there's a lot to be done, a lot to still be done, but we were able to start all that immediately because they followed their process. We're going to, I might as well talk about spoliation of evidence now. Has everyone heard of spoliation of evidence? In the litigation process today, many cases end up being almost as much about the evidence and what was not preserved as the underlying case and what happened. And what I mean by that is when an event happens, and as I mentioned before, you guys will be held to a higher standard when it comes to the entire claim investigation process. You've got resources that the common person doesn't have. You've got risk components. You've got people who specialize in the very thing I'm about to talk about. But documents need to be preserved. There's a term called a litigation hold. So when an event happens, and all you have to have is a reasonable belief that that claim is going to turn into some sort of litigation at some point in the future, you have a duty to hold on to all the documents that relate to that event. Now, when it comes to fire loss, the people on the other side of the beam, the contractor we may be suing, they have the same obligation to hold on to documents, to hold on to physical evidence, as the case may be. A lot of times, like on a sprinkler loss, the first people who get called are the people who might have created the problem. You have a sprinkler break. Who do you call? The sprinkler company. Who created the problem? The sprinkler company. So there's an inherent problem there, and some of them know what they're doing, some don't know what they're doing when they take away the evidence and throw it in the trash. Sorry, we were just doing what we were asked to do. We responded to the problem, fixed the problem, threw away what was broken. Now, they've been through that process before, and a very large company that has a risk department has probably given training seminars on evidence issues. They're going to be held to a very high standard, just like you guys are probably going to be held to a very high standard. So I would say it's especially true when you guys might be a target of a claim by somebody, to make sure you put a hold on everything that might be relevant evidence in that case, whether it's documents or physical. It could be the scene, it could be a lock on the door, it could be pipes, whatever it goes through.
I was going to share one anecdotal story just because I thought it was funny. There was a electric provider in the Oklahoma City area that had a string of problems where they were providing incorrect voltage in buildings. So it would spike up, it would drop down, they had brownouts, all kinds of weird things going on. And people were complaining about it, and they eventually had some fires that broke out. There were shorts and so on that occurred, and fires happened. Well, it just so happened every time they had a fire, at 4 in the morning, immediately following that fire, the meters, all the boxes and their equipment would disappear. And you call up and say, well, what happened to it? Oh, we just took it out. It was unsafe to have energized equipment out there, so we took it out. And oh, by the way, there was always a dead squirrel out there around the box. And it couldn't be a joke that they rolled out every morning with, their cones and their trucks full of gas, and they had their throw down squirrel. So, anyway.
Reduce the squirrel population.
Wow. Now, also involved in the investigation side, by definition, we're going to be working with a lot of other parties. And I always try to caution everybody, and we're all guilty of it. We are an email society now. We are a texting, email, non-verbal communication society. It's just the way life has developed in the United States and many others. That can be sometimes in a claim the worst possible thing. Because everyone's instinct is, well, let's make it fast and easy to communicate with everybody. So you may send an email out. You may include some of the people that are doing restoration work or might be vendors out of a fire scene. One of them may be a potential target. And if you don't have somebody coordinating all these communications and doing all this from a coordinated perspective, you may be providing privileged materials to parties that shouldn't be getting it. And once you've done that, it's pretty much too late. You have to avoid that from the front end because it's very hard to put that horse back in the barn once it's been released. So from a coordination perspective, that's also one reason why it's good to have a point person who understands all of these issues from from a very small level to the very large 30,000 foot view on how to communicate and how to coordinate these things properly, so that you don't make a mistake and something that you say about what happened doesn't get turned over to the wrong folks. Ken mentioned it before. A lot of times we'll have a claim where we see a contract that has bad language in it for recovery. It could be a subrogation waiver, it could be a limitation of liability. And the knee-jerk reaction might be, And let's make it worse. Let's make it the best subrogation case you would have had factually, but for this contract issue. That's a defense to the claim. It doesn't mean you don't have a valid claim. You still have a claim. There's just a defense to it. So you might want to take a shot at recovery. You might want to, and we've done this many times over the years. You send out a demand to the other side, and you hope that somebody hasn't seen the management contract. Now, you may make the demand very reasonable. Like if it's $1 million claim, you may make a $400,000 demand, even though it's a fantastic case, because you don't want somebody to go the extra mile and read the contract and read the terms of it on the backside of it. If they do it, you're dead, and you don't. I mean, I wouldn't file a suit on that claim, but I can make a demand. But if there's a lot of communication going back and forth amongst lots of people, and everyone here is probably guilty of sending an email by when you type like the letter H for Hobie and it hits somebody else who's an H, that your autofill kind of feature on your computer. You send an email to somebody mistaken. Well, what if I'm trying to send an email to Ken about the contract, and I send it to someone else at another company who shouldn't see that issue. So it's very important to be very focused on those sorts of things so that you don't make a mistake that could actually cost you the claim, and that has happened. And I'm sure it will happen to somebody else in the future. That could be the dire consequence of not having a very coordinated, focused investigation. Like I say, verbal communications, a lot of our coordination efforts are done verbally. We don't want to, especially in a fire scene to start with, there's more unknown than there is known about it. So I always try to have as much verbal communication as possible so that something you say about the loss doesn't come back to haunt you in the future. It's just a given that the case you think you have on day one is not going to be the case you end up with 30 days later or 2 years later. There's going to be a lot of changes. But if you're saying too much factually early on after an event happens, those words can come back to haunt you to the extent that stuff is discoverable. That's why I always try to, and let's talk about that for a second. When you're putting together your reports, how do you talk about the event from the subrogation?
Well, I'll identify potentials for subrogation. I'll talk about the fact that Hobie's assigned, or the experts that we have working, the possible avenues that we've got, the other carriers that are involved. Have we placed them on notice, all those kinds of things. Those all get covered in the report. And the other thing is in regards to the evidence. We have to talk about the status of the evidence. Is it being held where it should be? Is it being kept in a locked place that maybe only a manager or risk manager or somebody has the only key to, so it can't be messed with? Hobie had brought up, before spoliation of evidence. It can be something as silly as them moving from one place to another, or I get tired of it sitting in my desk drawer, so I go hand it to Ken, and we didn't sign off that Ken took it over, and it's now unlocked in Ken's desk. And then a good attorney on the other side will come along and say, well, we don't know where it's been, who's touched it, who's messed with it. It hasn't been in your control the whole time, so therefore, we'll make a motion to throw it out. So then that creates headaches for Hobie. But as far as my reports go, I try and touch lots of aspects of subrogation.
And I always tell the adjusters, the less you put in there about subrogation, at least early on, the better.
Oh, yeah.
It keeps it, on the off chance something does get produced, because it's part of the claims investigation, let's say, there's nothing in there that will come back to haunt you. So I always try to do that as best we can.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, and I think to Hobie's end, when I talk about what goes in the report, there's two different kinds of communication that go on between myself and then the carriers. One's going to be the quick and dirty email kind of thing, where I'm out on the site and I literally get into the truck. I've got everybody at bay long enough to get to the vehicle, and I'm on my iPhone and I send an email out to everybody and say, hey, look, this is kind of what we're looking at dollar-wise. And then here come the phone calls. They call me up. Okay, we'll get Hobie. And that's report, if you will. I'm warning them about what's going on with the claim to some extent, but it's very, very pared down. It's very limited information, very skeletal. And then within 30 days of me getting the claim in, that's when you get the big flowery report with all the nice photos, and it's typed, and my secretary corrects all the errors that I've left in it. And that's where we give them the information about the parties involved and all the other stuff I was talking about. So initially, yeah, in your 2-week window, not a lot of communication. It's nonverbal. Lots of telephone calls and identifying stuff. So.
The last point, I typed create a repository for everything created and be thorough in its use. And this actually takes on as much of a claims role as anything else. And some people call it a blanket purchase order, like it can be an accounting number. Ken, from the claim perspective, when you're trying to coordinate some of the expenses of the claim, talk about that and how helpful that could be for a company or an entity, a government entity, to keep all that stuff together.
Yeah, I mean, at least for us, we have a file that has basically all the information in the repository on the claim, so it's identified by what's, Trey, I give you the claim number, and that's how I identify who's intending it. And that's how Trey reports it back to me, so I know that we have more than one loss to keep track of. And then we have, on a separate bucket with all the expenses going too. We have to, various consultants on the CNO side and cost management side, Hobie, and or just the building consultants and the transport county, so it's all just kind of a big one. Trying to keep everything in the air at the same time, but maybe we can have a in a central repository for lack of better term, theirs. It's all about keeping everything in order.
Michelle, you want to maybe talk about that from the SORM perspective and how an agency might be able to create a BPO or something to pull everything together?
Certainly. This is really important. People who are in our property program, Trey is a fantastic advocate for doing that, for creating, if you have multiple buildings that have been damaged in a claim, he'll help you to organize your loss by putting it like in a folder or something, or on the computer in a file per building. Every invoice for that particular building goes in that file. You set up through your accounting department one PO number for the claim, so that any invoices that come in are assigned to that claim. And Trey, you being the expert at helping our agencies do this, what are the benefits of doing it that way as opposed to, I've got a whole bunch of invoices in this binder here, here's my claim.
Yeah, so.
And there's some over there in that binder. Oh wait, there's some back there too in the corner.
Yeah, and there's all levels of sophistication too, depending on the size of the entity and how organized they are and all that. So there are times literally where I get a banker box full of receipts and POs and emails and whatever, and I look and it's going, oh man, okay. So I go to the conference table and I start spread everything out, and I get it organized and I put it all together. But I am grateful when everybody saves everything for me. But when you're in doubt at all, should I keep this or not, keep it. You can always throw it away later after I go through and go, that's great that you kept the raffle ticket, that you got for the Little League game or something. It doesn't really help us out here. Let's go ahead and pitch that, and then we'll focus on the other stuff. So keep it. In regards to having the one point person, that's important too, because all the information, all the emails, all the tracking, all the POs, all the receipts, all that kind of stuff goes through that one person. That one person then becomes the comptroller, if you will, and has all that information in a folder, a physical folder, or since we're in the digital age, you save out of it, you make yourself a little file on the desktop if you're that one person, and everything that you're getting in, you save to that one desktop item, then you can regurgitate all that back to me whenever I'm asking for it. If we can sort it, by building, that's super helpful. If we can sort out, like people have a misconception, for instance, about labor, and they think, okay, well, because there's some labor involved with this, maybe, I've spent $40,000 in labor to clean up trees after the storm, and all $40,000 should be covered. Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. We need to segregate and say, well, is it extra expense? Is it above and beyond what you normally would spend on landscaping crews to be out working on your place? If it's overtime, yeah, let's talk about it. And maybe you missed the fact that there was gasoline for chainsaws, and you had to rent a log splitter or a chipper or whatever it is. Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff. So when I'm getting these things in and I'm starting to identify it, I will warn you ahead of time, even when I'm in the field, and say, hey, I see Ramirez over here with this giant chipper. What's that costing? Well, I don't know. That's not my. Let's have a chat about that. Let's get the invoice on that chipper. So I'll help you get it together. But central person, point person, save everything. Whether it's subrogation or pre-claim for my benefit and yours, then those two things are real important.
Anybody have any questions? I mean, obviously, everyone wants to ask something. Just go for it. Real quick, we talked a little bit about experts, but they are the fulcrum of every investigation that I'm involved with. And a lot of times, as I give presentations to folks and to the researchers about subrogation and the concept of subrogation, I've kind of morphed into, it's less about, hey, here's how we can recover the dollars, and more about cost containment and cost benefit. And a lot of that revolves around the use of experts in cases. If you're self-insured for something and you hire experts, you will be absolutely flabbergasted at how fast the costs add up. These budgets are, for a day, $3,000, $5,000. For a full-blown investigation, you can easily spend 6 figures on a large loss, especially fire claims, which tend to be more expansive than other types of claims. So you'll have to make sure that you're, first of all, hiring the right expert. The right expert on a loss, whatever the loss may be, can get to the issue, can get to the finding faster than hiring somebody who might be cheaper, but is going to flounder around a lot looking for, looking at issues that aren't really that relevant, or trying to make, maybe sometimes convince himself or maybe his boss that, he has done the right thing on this loss and has looked at the right issues. And it's important to be able to coordinate the right expert for the right loss, because the failure to do so can be extremely expensive. Also, we talked a little bit about claims that might have no potential whatsoever. I will go to my grave saying, you may want to hire someone just enough to know what happened, but if you know you're not going to have a valid subrogation claim, for instance, like a product failed and it's beyond the statute of repose. There's a limitation in Texas. 15 years is the statute of repose for products. So if a toaster malfunctions and is 16 years old, you have no right of recovery against anybody. So it would make no financial sense unless you have to send a fire expert out there. No offense. Unless you have to send somebody out there to document what happened. You don't want to have that person doing a full-blown subrogation investigation because it's meaningless. It's pointless. You might as well just take $2,500 and tear it up. You'd rather take that $2,500 and put that money into a good case that you might be able to make. You might be able to get an extra $50,000 out of somebody, an adverse party, by investing another $2,500 in it. So you always want to make sure your team, whether it's attorneys or your inside personnel or your adjusters, your insurance carriers, on your behalf, are focused on that bottom line too, because that is just as important to the recovery process as the physical getting back of the money. It really is. If you don't pay attention to it, it can outstrip any recoveries that you make, and you don't want that to happen. There's no use in doing it, going through the subrogation process, if you're not getting back money, and usually a substantial percentage of money for your efforts. We talked a lot during our discourse about spoliation. As I mentioned, it is something now that the courts are extremely savvy to. There used to be very little case law to talk about spoliation. Now there is a tremendous amount of case law that talks about spoliation. It is something you as a government entity must be aware of, must be involved with, and must actively manage to avoid. If you hire counsel on the outside, they should have this down to a science. They should know exactly what to do, what questions to ask, what people to talk to. A lot of times when I get lost for a very large corporation, one of the first calls I make, usually through a liaison at that company, is to someone in the IT department to make sure that the IT folks at that company know that there's been an event and that the company, needs to capture everything that relates to that event. And with their claims folks or the risk management folks, they can set up the right protocols and parameters within that system to make sure everything gets captured. Largest case I have is about $100 million warehouse fire loss in Grand Prairie, Texas. And one of the insurers is a company called 50 Buzz. And their risk manager, having been through a few losses, knew exactly what to do with her IT people. So that later on, when we asked her I asked Susan for, give me all your documents that relate to all these different issues. Literally, within 30 seconds, I had a share file link to their entire repository of every single document that they had. Damages, liability, everything involved in the claim process, it was all in one spot. And that's a beautiful thing. That's a process that worked like it should. The side benefit to that is when you're litigating against somebody and you're asking them to pay you $100 million, when you can turn around things really fast and you're all over the issue like clockwork, it gives you a stronger position in the case. If you have a team that is on top of everything, it sends a message to the other side. Listen, we've got this. We've already thought through all these issues. We've dealt with all this stuff. Usually they're floundering, looking for documents, asking for extensions, whatnot in discovery. If you've got everything all teed up and ready to go, you've already vetted it, you've got it all organized, and you've got your privilege logs all done in litigation, and you get that really fast out to the other side, you look like you've got your stuff together. And that really helps in the litigation. There's something called non-evidence that, we always have to fight the instinct in subrogation that, well, we know what happened and we're right. The fire was caused by this, that, or the other. And who could reasonably disagree with that? There's always another side of the story. So one of the issues in preserving a fire scene or preserving evidence, giving other parties a chance to see the evidence just like your folks did, is it gives everybody a chance to preserve any other evidence or non-evidence from the scene. And my funny little rule on it is if a defense attorney can bill a lot for it and create an issue where there might not be one, it's going to be more important the more you can bill, or she can bill. I don't have that problem because I'm on the contingency fee, so I never have to worry about bills. But a lot of the issues flow from things that you might not have anticipated on day one that somebody else picks up on later, and they can make a non-issue into a very important, significant issue in the case. Always try to minimize that to the best of your ability if you're the one, or you or your group is the one making the decisions. You never want to take damages for granted. From the carrier perspective, let's talk a little bit about that, Kenneth, if you would. When we're negotiating a subrogation claim to somebody, how do you guys view and look at the damages as far as the recovery perspective?
I mean, it depends on who the case is, too. I mean, it all depends on the evidence you have, how the cooperation's been, from a third-party perspective, if there was involvement, there's a contractor that is going to be readily saying, yeah, we've had some issues in the past, but we're working it. It's all about, just trying to get the best result without, overkill.
I would say overreaching. I call it overreaching. You never want to overreach on your damages in a case.
Yeah. You want to be realistic. It's in your best interest for yourself. You're insured. I mean, everybody here is busy. How much time do you have to get the best result, but with the minimal impact? That's fine.
Right. And one of my partners would kill me if he didn't say this, but I can spend 50 hours to give you a 98% product. I could probably give you a 95% product in 6 hours. The cost-benefit analysis of time and your recovery, and the ability to handle lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of cases, in a program like we have this school. I know from my relationship with Ken, that 95% product is what he wants. He's not going to want someone spending, because if I had to spend 50 hours with my experts going over tons and tons of materials with it, that's costing a small fortune. So that time, that extra time that you invest in something, usually equates with much higher expenses, and you don't get a bang for the buck.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. It just far exceeds what you.
And if you're realistic on your damages, if you realize that when you pay replacement costs on a building, or a replacement cost for contents, you may only get actual cash value back. Accept that, embrace that. You know the other side is going to bring it up. Why spend months and months fighting over something that you don't really have a leg to stand on? So, the faster you can deal with your damages, the more realistic you are with your damages, the faster the subrogation process goes. And obviously, it goes without saying, when you work with good adjusters who know these issues, when you're handling the damages on the claim, how do you view it with that eye towards subrogation? What's your mindset?
Well, yeah, the one pitfall I see some adjusters taking is that they'll go super light on depreciation because, like Hobie's saying, maybe you only recover ACV. Well, if you got a 40-year-old typewriter that sat in the corner for 30 years of the past 40, we're not going to get a lot out of that. I'll see some guys that try and overblow the value of that typewriter. It's not ever going to be used or replaced again. There's some of those kinds of things. So keeping it reasonable, not gold plating everything. Don't, do something different because you think there's subrogation or not, because sometimes you may see the avenue that's going to be clear and you're going to get everything segregated, you're going to get your money back, and then we have a legal gotcha that stops it. So, some people are going to be on the hook and may lead to hard feelings. So the two kind of have to go in tandem. You have a reasonable loss, you have a reasonable measure of your loss, reasonable presentation, keep that evidence together, don't plate it, and don't try and overstate things. Makes it a whole lot easier argument for Hobie on the other end when he's sitting in there and the judge says, really, you're giving me this gold-plated, flowery thing here, and you had something that was nowhere near that. You had a dirt cloth, and you're trying to sell me on this. So it makes his job tough.
And actually, I've had 17 jury trials. It's very difficult to get a subrogation case to go to trial. You have a very limited parameter, I guess, on the negative side and the positive side as to what the case is worth. You know it from the plaintiff side, and the defense knows it from the defense side. So generally speaking, 99% of my cases settle, usually slightly before or slightly after or during mediation. And that's usually the window of settlement. But I've averaged one trial per year of my practice, which is a vast majority more than many of the folks I work with. Scott Katz has had 10 years more experience than I have, and he's had like 12 or 13 jury trials because it's so hard to try these cases. But in those 17 trials, I've only had to prove damages twice. The other 15 trials, I was able to stipulate the damages ahead of time, take all those issues off the table, not have to bore the jury with days and days of, no offense, days and days of mundane damages stuff. And it makes it much more efficient and a much faster, more effective case when you can do something. Now, we talked a lot about the first few days, the first couple weeks, maybe the first month of a loss, and how organization helps. There's usually a lull after the fire scene inspection, after the plumbing loss and the pipes have been removed and everything is done. Usually, in my experience, there's a lull in activity from the investigation side. Sometimes the experts are working on some issues. Many times they have their theories all lined up, all buttoned up within the first 30 days. The process is working quickly. Then the claim kind of takes over. Usually we have to wait for the claim to resolve before we or you guys are handling a claim yourselves. Before you can actually make a demand on somebody, you have to know what the total dollar loss is. That usually takes, it can take a few months. Sometimes it takes longer than that. And so, during that time period, there's a lot of issues that we have to finesse and have to work through. Obviously, we spend that downtime, document gathering, making sure we have as many documents as we can get our hands on, everything that sounds remotely relevant to the case. We always have to try to be very sensitive to any relationships that you guys might have. You might work with a vendor all the time, and they may be a target of subrogation. So, make sure whoever you work with who's handling those claims, whether it's outside counsel, the AG's office, or whomever, is sensitive to those relationships. There's a phrase, you don't want to cut off your nose to spite your face. You don't want to affect a relationship that's been very beneficial and fruitful for you with a vendor with somebody coming in heavy-handed and yelling and screaming about how horrible a job they do. You can still make the claim very effectively. You can soft sell it sometimes. You can treat them with kid gloves as opposed to a sledgehammer. But you want to make sure that everyone who's handling the claim realizes that there's some sensitivities that need to be dealt with, and a certain contractor or a certain party might need to be handled a little bit differently than someone that you're very adversarial with. Just something to do.
We've had some cases that, exactly like that too. I mean, the insured didn't choose to go forward from the subrogation perspective, but they let us go ahead, the carriers go ahead and subrogate, in their name, but they just didn't. They stepped aside from it. So on top of proceeds or anything that we received back from that specific vendor.
And that happens frequently.
Yeah.
Handling your uninsured losses, you could easily have many instances. Your losses might be larger than the insurance carrier. What we do and what law firms should do when they work together with the carrier and the insured, whether it's a government entity or a private entity, On the very front end, you need to make sure the relationship is clearly defined, that both parties agree on what those damages are, what's recoverable, and that you work out some sort of litigation fee agreement that talks about how the money will get split. Now, your policy, or the SORM policy, is written in such a way that it's pro rata. So whatever the numbers are, you get back a pro rata portion of the recovery, however that shakes out. Not all policies are defined like that, so it's something that you and your attorney advisors, whoever might be someone you would go to on those issues, would need to work out to make sure that that relationship is clearly defined, and just as importantly, whoever has the settlement authority on the case is clearly defined. In my world, it's not always the insurance company. If you have an insured who has a very large deductible, they may actually be a better fit in the litigation process to be the settlement decision maker in the case. They have more skin in the game. They also have a more direct relationship a lot of times with the parties that are involved in the case. And sometimes they can kind of behind the scenes make things happen that we, outside of those bounds, can't really do. They can talk to somebody that they have a relationship with and get something settled. So you always want to make sure that it's not just one size fits all sort of thing. These fee agreements can be structured to be the most beneficial for the parties and for the case. And the last thing you want to have happen is show up at mediation. And this has happened. I've seen this before. Show up at mediation where an insurance carrier and another insured have not gotten on the same page about what's going to happen. You have a liability carrier offering money to pay the claim, but they can't figure out how to split the money. And the whole thing goes to heck in a handbasket because of that, because they weren't coordinated and they didn't have the agreement wasn't clearly set forth. Once again, we've mentioned this before. All of these issues we've talked about are just as important when entities are making a claim against SORM or any of your entities, any of your governmental entities. So all the concepts are plus or minus a few degrees exactly the same. Litigation is obviously the result of a large portion of claims. Many claims do get resolved pre-suit. You have to be ready to litigate. That could be full-blown litigation. It could be arbitration. It could be pre-suit mediation. It can take on lots of forms. The goal is obviously to be as creative and as efficient as possible. Get it resolved as quickly as possible. That's the goal is always litigation. That's not always going to be the best thing for the case. Certainly not the best thing from the cost perspective. This was Jack Nicholson in The Shining typing "all work and no play makes Jack a Billboard," which was my prelude to written discovery. It can be torturous at times. Defense attorneys are getting paid by the hour. So me on the other side, I'm on a contingency fee. I want everything to be fast, quick. Forget all this document production. Let's just pick up the phone, call each other, and agree on we're going to produce stuff. I want it to be fast and easy. You get from the defense, page after page after page after page after page of requests, just like Jack Nicholson was typing. They all seem to say the same darn thing. And then it becomes round one, and then round two, and then round three of discovery. Written discovery and litigation can be very, very onerous, time-consuming, and oftentimes not very effective. This was a loss we had in Louisiana. It's not funny. This was. If you find this funny, you've got some serious issues. This was video footage of a roof collapse of a massive warehouse in Louisiana. It's not going to play, but after it's 5 seconds of just peaceful harmony, everything's going along great. Then in just a literal split second, the entire roof collapses and millions of gallons of water is poured into the building. That's the kind of evidence that's the most effective evidence in the case. And most of our property subrogation cases, the documents that get produced are much more important than the written discovery that ends up happening in the case. I try to bug you guys as little as possible. When I say you guys, you or a company, as little as possible and as few times as possible as I need to get all the stuff we need. But invariably, it's going to be a few phone calls, a few emails, several requests for documents, and the more organized all that stuff is, the easier and faster that goes. Has anybody here been deposed? I'm sure many of you will attest. It can be a very painful, nerve-wracking, arduous process. Just by definition, it's an adversarial situation. And you've got somebody on the other side of the table asking you questions about something that can get twisted and turned. That's the nature of what, unfortunately, lawyers do to cases. We try to twist the facts and interpret the facts and make them beneficial for our side, and the other side is doing the bipolar opposite. So, if you're ever in the deposition, if you're ever involved in a deposition or stuck in that setting, that is one of the drawbacks to litigation, is you guys may be the ones being asked the hard questions, and a lot of times it's Trey, a lot of times it's Kenneth in a suborgation case. But most of the case, all that stuff is interesting on the damages side. That's interesting, but most of the case is spent talking to the folks who know the most about what happened. That's you guys. So, once I have committed a case to litigation, I deal far more with you or the company, the insured, than I do with my insurance claims. It's just the nature of the beast. From Animal House, this was the famous "When the Germans Bombed Pearl Harbor" speech that John Belushi gave. This is my motivational speech that leads into the mediation process. It seems like the longer I do this, the more difficult it is to get a claim resolved early on. Liability carriers, for many companies, many liability companies, insurance companies, have not devoted the time and training to the claims process on the liability side as they have on the property side. This is what I've seen, kind of what I just have extrapolated over the years as to why the process isn't as quick and efficient as it used to be. So I've sort of had to adopt how we sell a case. I now know that I'm going to have to go through a set number of depositions. I'm going to have to do a set number of events just to get to the mediation process that 17 or 18 years ago you didn't have to do. So you want to make sure that when you're working on a claim with your outside counsel or with whoever's handling it on y'all's behalf, they have a focused game plan for a quick resolution and prosecution of the case. I've got a case involving a warehouse in Grand Prairie, Texas, where I made all the parties, there's 7 or 8 parties, I made us all sit down one day in Dallas with our calendars, and we mapped out over the course of 14 months, 18 weeks, we were all going to hold to do just depositions in the case. I knew there's no way to avoid an $100 million loss. There's no way to avoid dozens upon dozens upon dozens of depositions. What I didn't want to have happen was, let's do a deposition one day, and then, okay, maybe another month we'll do this day over here and another day over here. It's going to be very expensive, it's going to be timely, and it's going to not get the case resolved. So you want to make sure that whatever the process is done quickly, efficiently, coordinated. Make sure that whoever you're working with is building a team concept in the entire case so that everybody's moving in the same direction. That gets you to the mediation faster. That gets the claim resolved faster. I'm not going to believe this. And then, if that fails, you gear up for trial. And once again, Trey is very important on the damages side. Ken's very important in the trial because he's the one controlling the dollars and cents usually. But the trial is really about you guys. The vast majority of everything that happens at trial, everything leading up to trial, a lot of times even talks during the trial, revolve around you guys when it's your claim that's being pursued. So you always have to be ready for that and make sure that your team concept embraces that because it's your case. Your insurance company may step into your shoes, but it's still your case. We got to almost. I was told to make sure we get to 11:30, so we're on schedule. But we have 5 minutes for questions. Any subrogation experiences anybody's had, or any issues that anybody wants to talk about, please feel free.
You just answered everything.
No, I don't think so. Was there anything else you wanted to ask, or anything you want to cover that we didn't?
Maybe just, if Trey, if you could talk quickly. I know some of you in here do not have property insurance through the SORM program, and you may have had a loss perhaps a catastrophic loss, and I'm not sure where you're all from, where you would have had to have found money within your budget or utilised FEMA to assist in the payouts of claims. May not have been your agency, but there are other agencies, particularly along Houston, that have had to do this because they previously did not have insurance. Have you got some experience of working with FEMA and what people who don't have insurance might have to think about?
Yeah, FEMA's, it's kind of an odd duck. There's no contract that's in place between governmental entity, a person, and FEMA. FEMA's kind of the fairy godmother that comes in and decides what they're going to give you. Maybe enough, maybe not. They sure don't make it an easy process. There's tons of forms. They make insurance claim look, really, really easy. FEMA, it's so much the Wild West when it comes to what they're going to pay out. It makes CPAs and CFOs absolutely nuts on the end user entity side. I've sat and watched a 35-year veteran CPA cry after she got the demand from the FEMA folks and stuff that they wanted to look at, the forms they wanted filled out and all that. She literally cried. And she calls me up. I happen to be in the area as opposed to Ike. It happened to be a particular entity that got hit with Ike, and they had insurance, but there were some other costs that they had where they were improving the grounds to prevent floods from happening in the future, which is something insurance company can handle. But she was thinking maybe, being a good guardian of their money, and was trying to get with FEMA to see if they would recoup some of the costs out of FEMA. It's a headache. There's percentages. They may decide that, well, some of this was preventable. You have these buildings, you have time to do improvements. You should have recognized that it was a bad risk. You needed to raise it, so therefore I'm only going to give you 30%. And, oh, by the way, you got to raise it now. You have to raise your buildings to conform to this new flood plan. And, oh, by the way, if I give you the 30%, now you've got to insure it. You have to show me for 10 years that you've insured it so that we don't have to come back and touch it again, because we don't want to be in the business of coming out here every time you get a storm and paying it out. So FEMA gives you all kinds of wonderful headaches. And it's not my favorite thing to do is to have to try and work with the FEMA adjusters when they get involved with it, because it's very arbitrary, it's very personality driven, it's not a contract, it's just a bizarre way of looking at it to me. Because I'm very much, the policy says this, therefore we're paying this. And I'm very cut and dried about that kind of stuff, and it just seems very wide open to me as far as FEMA goes. So it's a headache, it's a challenge. There's even some public adjuster groups and some CPA groups and so on that make a very good living on collating that claim for you for FEMA to present to somebody, and they charge a fortune for that. And there's lots of back and forth, and like I said, lots of paperwork documentation. So FEMA's not, if anybody's related to a FEMA person somewhere, my apologies for disparaging FEMA so hard, but yeah, my personal opinion, FEMA's not very good. So.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I know some of the participants that are in our current property program are in it for that exact reason. They didn't have insurance, they claimed FEMA funds, now they have to insure it. And 10 years after the fact, some of those agencies are being audited by FEMA for the documentation 10 years ago for that loss. So good for you to at least know about that for your own information. But if there are no more, did you have a question, I'm sorry? No. If there are no more questions, I'd like to ask these wonderful three gentlemen to help me draw the next raffle.